There are few foods as synonymous with the festive season as the humble Christmas pudding. Carolers demand it in We Wish You a Merry Christmas. Charles Dickens made it a centerpiece of the Cratchit's feast in A Christmas Carol. And every year in the UK, they eat a massive 25 million of the sweet treats. Plenty are created from long-standing family recipes which have been handed down the generations, with the lengthy cooking process as much of a tradition as the spectacle of flaming it at the dinner table before dolloping brandy butter on top. When done right, it's sticky and dense, warmly spiced and distinctively dark in color. While raisins, suet, brown sugar, spices, and brandy can be found in most modern variations, the sweet cake-like nature of today's pudding is a far cry from its early incarnations. So grab your fork, because we're going in for a second helping. I'm Glenn Warren, and welcome to another serving of Seasons Eatings, the podcast which explores the history and origins of your favorite Christmas foods. Seasons Eatings can be found wherever you download your favorite podcasts, and if you haven't already, I would ask you to subscribe. That way you won't miss an episode when it's released, and all future episodes will be available without having you to search for them. And if you can take a short minute and leave me a 5-star review, I would greatly appreciate it. Reviews help others find the podcast and help me know that you're enjoying what I'm doing. And if you let me know you've left a review, I'll send you a Seasons Eatings sticker as a personal thank you. Seasons Eatings is also found on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. All the links can be found in the show notes, which also can be found on seasonseatingspodcast.com. And while you're there, you can buy me an eggnog. Just click on the little cup in the corner and leave a donation for as little as $3. Each donation is used for the running of the podcast and its general upkeep, so any help will be wonderful. Finally, you can let me know how I'm doing, leave a suggestion for a future episode, or just say hello and email me at seasonseatingspodcast@gmail.com. Welcome to the bonus episodes for the Burr months of the year. In previous seasons, I've done something called a side dish and focused on foods or ingredients that don't necessarily get the main focus during the holidays. This year, I thought I'd do something a little different, and I'm calling it Second Helpings. I'm going to take a food I've done before and go into a deeper dive with a little bit more history than before. My first episode on this amazing ride of a podcast was Figgy pudding, and looking back, I really did not know what I was doing. The episode is only about 12 minutes long, and I really didn't know my voice or you, my audience. So I thought I'd go back and reveal a little bit more. The first recorded use of figgy pudding is from a 14th century cookbook called The Form of Curry, compiled by the cooks of King Richard II. It's a very simple recipe. Basically, take blanched almonds, grind them, remove them, and mix with water, wine, quartered figs, whole raisins, add in some powdered ginger, clarified honey, boil it well, salt, and serve. Christmas pudding has its roots in medieval English sausages, in fact, when fat, spices, and fruits, the best preservatives of the day, were mixed with meats, grains, and vegetables packed into an animal's stomach and intestine so they would keep as long as possible. The original blueprint for Christmas pudding was frumenti, a dish in which texture was similar to porridge and was commonly eaten across medieval Western Europe. In its most basic form, it was made from grains, boiled with water or milk, and thickened with breadcrumbs. though more affluent families added meat such as beef or mutton, sweetened it with sugar and dried fruits, and added spices such as cinnamon and saffron. It was similar to a porridge, almost like a thick soup rather than the post-dinner pudding we know today. It's believed to have been eaten at Easter and as a fasting meal before the Christmas festivities began. In the early 15th century, it became better known as plum pottage. This consisted of a mixture of meats, grains, spices, and fruits, particularly raisins and currants, rather than actual plums, which was then boiled in a bag. The fact that it didn't require an oven made it popular among poorer families. Over time, more thickening was added, firming up its texture and inspiring its name change to plum pudding. And when sugar became cheaper and better meat-preserving techniques were developed, until this point, meat had often been stuffed in animal stomachs for preservation, creating sweet and savory versions of the dishes became easier. As the savory side of plum pudding began to dwindle, it was replaced instead by sweeter elements. Then, as now, the plum in plum pudding was a generic term for any dried fruit. Most commonly, it was raisins and currants, with prunes or other dried and preserved or candied fruit added when available. By the end of the 16th century, dried fruit was more plentiful in England, and plum pudding made the shift from savory to sweet. The development of pudding cloth, a floured piece of fabric that could hold and preserve a pudding of any size, further freed the pudding from the dependence on animal products. But not entirely. Suet, the fat found around beef and mutton kidneys, has always been a key ingredient. Suet, which is a hard, crumbly, saturated fat and is traditional to the dish, but is now often substituted with vegetable shortening or butter. The figgy pudding from some supermarkets is made with vegetable suet in addition to diced figs, currants, and dark rum and spices, included ground ginger and cinnamon. Nowadays, people will use flour to create a lighter cake, and some, especially vegetarians, may opt out and use butter over suet. Suet being the last reminder we have that Christmas pudding was originally made with meat and was cooked in a pot like porridge. Around the same time, carolers began to sing the English folk song, "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." When poor folk stood on doorsteps of the wealthy and sang, "Oh, bring us some figgy pudding, and we won't go until we get some," they were probably having a little bit of fun, being bold about the relationship between the two classes and spreading some Christmas cheer. Marked as a Christmas tradition in Britain in the mid-1600s, these Christmas desserts were banned in 1647 by Puritans, but reinstated as a Christmas pudding by King George I. By Victorian times, the ingredients had become close to that of modern versions, and the recipe became standardized in the 19th century. Now, the Christmas figgy pudding typically includes breadcrumbs, eggs, brown sugar, suet, raisins, currants, orange candied peel, nutmeg, cloves, allspice, and a little bit of alcohol. Figs have never actually been an official ingredient, but they are included from time to time, inspiring the well-known name along the way. As with many English-derived Christmas traditions, the standard form for Christmas pudding solidified during the Victorian era, when English journalists, political leaders, and novelists, not least Dickens himself, worked to promulgate a standardized, family-friendly English Christmas. Among England's poor, Christmas-saving clubs sprung up to help housewives lay away pennies throughout the year to purchase pudding ingredients come Christmas time. Families throughout England began to celebrate the last Sunday before Advent, in which the Book of Common Prayer's liturgy includes a prayer that begins, "Stir up, we beseech thee, O Lord, the wills of thy faithful people," as Stir Up Sunday, in which family members take turns stirring up the Christmas pudding to be, which was then wrapped and boiled and set aside to mature until Christmas Day. By the 19th century, the ingredients were more or less standardized to the ingredients that we know today to make figgy pudding. We'll hear about the difference between figgy pudding, Christmas pudding, and plum pudding after the break.
We interrupt this podcast about Christmas to tell you about another podcast about Christmas. It's the Advent Calendar House, a salute to all holiday specials, but mostly the Christmas ones. Count down to Christmas Eve with a new episode every other day in December about a different holiday show. From the must-watch classics to the lost treasures at the bottom of the DVD bargain bin. Learn the answers to questions nobody asked, like, when is a magic hat you throw away no longer yours? How many Muppets can fit inside a farmhouse? How did cavemen know about Christmas? Why is Alf making me cry? Subscribe now at adventcalendar.house and get 12 episodes every December. But that's not all. You'll also get 12 more episodes during Christmas in July. Why am I talking like a car salesman? It's a free podcast. It's the Advent Calendar House, a podcast on the internet.
It's the Advent Calendar House.
Hello, Christmas lovers and enthusiasts. If you're like me and you're always counting down the days until Christmas, I invite you to listen to Closer to Christmas. Think of the podcast as like a Christmas advent calendar. Each episode that comes out, we get a little bit closer to Christmas, and it's always a surprise as to what the Christmas-related topic will be for that episode. So search for Closer to Christmas on your favorite podcast platform of choice, or head over to anchor.fm/closer to Christmas. Thanks, and I hope to see you there soon.
Charles Dickens managed to almost single-handedly revive old Christmas traditions with his 1843 book, A Christmas Carol, which celebrated a nostalgic holiday of redemption and love. One of the traditions he upheld was that of the now iconic Christmas pudding. In a long passage, he shows Mrs. Cratchit steaming and preparing the pudding for her excited family. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. All sorts of horrors were supposed. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding, like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quarter of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Maybe Mrs. Cratchit used this 1837 recipe, taken from the housekeeper's book comprising advice on the conduct of household affairs in general. 1 pound of breadcrumbs, rubbed through a colander, half a pound of flour, 1 1/4 of suet very finely chopped, 1/4 pound of sugar, 1 pound of currants, half pound of raisins. Mix well and add 2 ounces each of candied citron, candied orange peel, and candied lemon peel. 1 nutmeg, grated, a little mace, cinnamon, and 3 cloves pounded, 1/4 teaspoon of powdered ginger. Mix well again and add 1 wine glass full of brandy, 1 of white wine, and the juice of 1 lemon. Mix well and stir in 6 beaten eggs. Boil for 5 hours and sift sugar over the top when served. An aside, the previous recipe cookbook's author is listed as a lady, in which makes me wonder if the real author didn't or couldn't be known. Or maybe it was just a conglomeration of recipes and they just didn't want to attribute one person to them. As the 19th century arrived, a Yuletide boiled cake of fruit, sugar, and spices, often topped with a sprig of holly, had become popular, with recipes resembling the pudding we know today, first appearing in the 1830s. In 1845, for example, cook Eliza Acton referred to the Christmas pudding in her best-selling book Modern Cookery for Private Families. It was, after all, the Victorian era, which cemented many of the festive traditions we celebrate today, including Christmas cards and decorated trees and a roasted bird for our main meal. For Victorian citizens of the British Empire, the Christmas pudding was a summation of their conception of the world, a globe-like mass studded with savory bits from distant colonies, bound together by a steamed and settled matrix of Englishness. An 1848 satirical cartoon titled John Bull Showing the Foreign Powers How to Make a Constitutional Plum Pudding showed an English stand-in preparing to carve a bulging holly sprig pudding labeled Liberty of the Press, Trial by Jury, Common Sense, and Order. The Christmas pudding's well-preserved nature, it took a month to get seasoned and could last for over a year, meant it could be enjoyed as a taste of home by far-flung soldiers and colonizers. An 1850 London Illustrated News article also describes its prominence in similar terms. The plum pudding is a national symbol. It does not represent a class or caste, but the bulk of the English nation. There is not a man, woman, or child raised above what the French would call prolétaires that does not expect a taste of plum pudding in some sort of another on Christmas Day. In 1885, a British newspaper reported the joyful consumption of a plum pudding, sent overland via special envoy from Tehran by a group of British soldiers stationed in northwestern Afghanistan. Although figgy pudding, plum pudding, and Christmas pudding are often used interchangeably, there are a few subtle differences in terms of their ingredients and historical variations. The term plum pudding originally referred to a type of English spiced boiled pudding that contained raisins, nuts, and spices. Plum was a generic term to refer to various dried fruits, such as raisins, currants, and prunes, rather than specifically the plum fruit itself. And plum pudding was a type of boiled or steamed pudding that contained a mix of these fruits, plus all the other ingredients I listed before: spices, breadcrumbs, eggs, and sometimes alcohol. Over time, the term plum pudding evolved into what is now commonly known as Christmas pudding. It was a traditional English dessert served during the Christmas holiday season. Figgy pudding is actually a specific type of Christmas or plum pudding that contains, you name it, figs as the primary ingredient, along with other dried fruits. However, there was a 15th century recipe for figgy pudding, which was basically mashing the figs together and then with a little bit of breadcrumbs, boiling it in wine and topping with pomegranate seeds. Over the past century, the Christmas pudding has slimmed down and simplified somewhat, according to modern tastes. The pudding bag, in which the pudding is twice boiled, is often replaced with molds shaped like a half melon or a bundt cake. Instructions for lighting the brandy sauce prior to serving include numerous fire safety caveats. The pudding's pagan roots are now celebrated rather than swept under the Christmas tree skirt. And across the Atlantic, where fruitcake's own fortunes have waned in recent decades, Christmas pudding remains a curiosity known primarily from films, books, and song lyrics, and is associated with Christmas crackers, paper crowns, Bob Cratchit, and Boxing Day. Thank you for listening to this second helping of Seasons Eatings. Seasons Eatings is available wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And please, if you can leave a review about the show so we can spread the Christmas cheer. And also, I would love to hear from you. Send me an email at seasonseatingspodcast@gmail.com to let me know how you like the show, suggestions for any future episodes, or just to say hi. And again, if you left a review and let me know, I'll send you a Seasons Eating sticker for your trouble, as well as my unwavering gratitude. And if you're feeling extra generous this season, you can buy me an eggnog. Head on over to seasonseatingspodcast.com, click on the little cup in the corner. Each small donation helps with the daily running of the podcast and is greatly appreciated. Also, there is a merchandise tab in the seasonseatingspodcast.com website. Click on the tab, find your next great gift. All music used on Seasons Innings is used under the Creative Commons license.